and trying to make sense of it. So the real, I think of the real job of philosophy today is kind of not being a specialist in any of the other subjects, but instead trying to learn from everybody's work in all their specialties and kind of accumulate it all together to like make a big picture out of everything, which is quite a job. I mean, it's
Sure.
no one really can handle all of that. I mean, there are some fantastic. I mean, there are some contemporaries that are really fantastic. I love reading them and following what they're doing, but they argue with one another, you know. So it's pretty darn interesting. And an awful lot of people that are in philosophy end up specializing in a very minute area of philosophy. So philosophy as a subject area has been impacted by this urge to focus on a very narrow area of expertise, so you can become absolutely the expert in, you know, biomedical ethics, you know, or you know, whatever your specialty is, you know, because the questions are so detailed and you have to know all the literature. And that's so for a PhD, that's where you've got to go. You've got to figure out what area you're going to concentrate in, and then just really know everything that's happening in that particular narrow field. You know, so in a sense, that limits you to that specialty, which is really just the opposite of what really made me enthusiastic about philosophy. So,
how would like a philosopher who was, say, you know, focusing on, you know, quantum mechanics be different than a physics major who was, you know, focused in that field? I mean, the background would be different, I guess. The requirements for a degree, certainly.
well, they would clearly overlap a lot.
Right.
But the difference really would be that I think the philosophy major would be more interested in the application of that in other, you know, so like, okay, so quantum mechanics, you know, okay, well, but how does it influence theory of mind? How does that explain how we know things? And morality, and the society that knows this, will that be better off than the society that didn't? You know, I think it's pretty clear we'd rather live here in Anchorage, or the municipality of Anchorage, than we would rather live in Raqqa in the Middle East, in the capital of ISIS, right?
Sure.
I love Sam Harris in one of his TED Talks, where he's talking about which book was it? Might be The End of Faith. I forget which one he would. It was the Moral Landscape, I think it was called. Was the book, and at one point he says, so, you know, what would a member of the Taliban know about the good life any more than, you know, he knows about quantum physics? You know, and you know, so would I listen to a member of the Taliban about the good life? You know, I wouldn't ask him about quantum physics. Neither would I ask him about living the good life. You know, they're clearly, and if we think of the scheme of things as progressive, they're way down on the bottom of the hill of progress. You know, so we don't go and ask them about quantum physics, nor should we really go and ask them about, you know, ethics. And after all, they're you know, covering their women in bags, you know, stoning people for stealing bread, you know, or whatever, right?
Right.
You know, that's incredibly backward. That's medieval, basically.
Yep.
Yeah, whereas a quantum physicist, I would think, is primarily just going to be looking for a particular set of particles and responses to that. So I think his scope of interest would be much narrower. Now the thing is, there are physicists that break out of that and start talking about other things. So Feynman, I think, would be an example of that, right?
Okay.
Write a lot about other things.
Sure.
So it bleeds over, but you can become a philosopher if you're a physicist. You know, Richard Dawkins is a biologist, and yet after a couple of hit books, The Selfish Gene, and a couple others, he branched out and became really a philosopher. Although his background in philosophy doesn't seem to be very deep, and so he makes some really rude mistakes, I think. So on the other hand, I think of Stuart Kaufman, who started off as a philosophy major and then became a geneticist in biology, and everyone thinks of him as a genius. But when you look at his books are not just focused on biology. They're really a kind of a philosophical approach to the whole thing. That's Stuart Kaufman. He's really intriguing. He's got some really good books out. Although I'm not typing any place. I don't know what the heck happened. I met him here. He was here. He lectured here more than a few years ago, I guess. Maybe 10 years.
He was teaching at UAA, or he was just...
No, he was here as a visiting speaker for our complex systems group, which used to have a lot of money for speakers and now has zilch because of budget. We had some really great folks up here, and he's really clearly a philosopher in my book than a biologist. I mean, so and actually you're a philosopher. Sitting here being interested, by definition, makes you a lover of wisdom, and and all Plato really said, of course that's the beginnings of it, was let none without geometry enter here, right?
Right.
Right. Well, so basically he didn't want idiots, to sit around. He wanted people that were interested and literate. Well, actually literacy might not have even been an issue, because Plato actually was very critical of the idea of writing stuff down, even though of course he did. He was very concerned that it would change the nature of education, because up until that point, an educated person memorized all the things that they were supposed to know.
Wow.
And Plato was critical of the idea that, well, if we start writing it down, you're not going to have to remember it anymore. That's very similar to like the critique of Google. Is Google making us stupid, right? Because we don't have to remember stuff anymore because we could just Google it. And so, oh, okay, I got the answer. Now I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's gone, right?
Sure.
We have to memorize stuff anymore. Seems like not, On the other hand, that's not really very good, because if you're going to be able to solve problems, you have to have like data. If you have the right algorithm, that's great, but if you don't have any data, nothing will happen. So
I've definitely stopped remembering phone numbers. It's something I used to, a bunch of numbers in my head, and since we now have smartphones.
I go to Philadelphia now, and I don't try to remember the layout of the town, because I have the little device telling me, turn left.
Sure.
In fact, the last time I was driving to the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Art and Archaeology, I listened to the device tell me how to get there, even though I knew how to go. And at the point where I was going to get off of the Schuylkill Highway, it's actually the Schuylkill, but we always call it the Schuylkill. I knew I would, okay, this is where I would get off to get to the museum. And it said, no, keep going. And I was like, all right, prove it. So I just kept going. And it had me get off at the next exit. And guess what? If I had gotten off at the exit that I used to get off, then you have to weave your way through traffic to get to it. By getting off at the next exit, I came up and I was 1 block behind it. I was like right by the parking lot. So I was like...
Not only that, your phone now knows where the traffic jams are. That
Yeah.
by polling everybody, where everybody's phones are and how fast they're moving, they can keep track of where traffic jams are now.
The device I have for like when I use a rental car is a TomTom. So, and it's out of date and everything, but I'm not going to spend extra money to update the stupid software because I figure, hey, the roads don't really change, but they do. I don't know. But I'm cheap, so I don't know. Well, so let's move on because so original sin. I thought that's a pretty darn interesting question because not everyone is raised Roman Catholic, and so not everyone becomes familiar with the theory of original sin. Some argue that it is actually Augustine that invents it, which is kind of intriguing, and it actually ties into this dilemma of his concept of God and how he merges the two. So if God is, remember, infinite, outside of time and space, and we're finite beings, just kind of trucking along second by second. So our conception of God is totally limited to our finite experiences, and so that really explains like the whole anthropomorphic interpretation of God. We think of God as similar to, say, our society. So you might say, oh, well, in a nomadic sort of environment where everyone has their own tribes and everybody has their own gods, there's a multiplicity of gods, and there might even be lots of gods from place to place. So if you think about the Middle East and they have these the rocks all over the place, like henges, I guess, or henge actually means a hinge, right? So they might not actually have hinges, but they have lots of oh, this looks pretty good. Maybe that'll be. So there's lots of places where they have these stones. Of course, there's the Stonehenge is, of course, the one we think of in England, but there are actually thousands of these sites. And so there's lots of attempts to explain what these were. Basically camping sites. So in if in the terrain, it's hard to remember where you are because it looks so similar. You have stones implanted by the people that have been using the site time after time, basically as a way of marking the place. But also they're arranged apparently in a way of trying to indicate, the stars or something. So they become very quickly astronomical in their orientation and so on. But so they're all over the place. And there might have been gods associated with those particular places. They might even, some of them end up becoming carved as idols. So as the stones become more and more developed, they end up becoming like, well, so this particular stone is George, and this one is Peter, or I don't, and they're, go to George if you want to ask about your sore toe, or something. I don't, so there's a multiplicity of these, and so we think of, like the Hindus, for example, as having thousands of gods, countless gods, right? We think of the pagan religions, and pagano comes from the Latin for the countryside. So basically these are the uneducated folks that believe in the traditional gods of their communities, their tribes, etc. Have a multiplicity of gods that are like, how you get water, from this particular oasis, or how you, keep healthy instead of getting sick, while you're here or something. So it's kind of pre-scientific belief that there are special entities that exist that if you learn how to cooperate with them, they will take care of you in various respects and so on. But then as, say, you get into a monotheistic power or a monarchical power, right? Now the social structure is such that you have a hierarchy with individuals that gradually become the significant person at the top who sits at a throne, and the powerful people with him are like on his right hand and stuff. And so what happens is the conception of God becomes like that, right? That's God is one, and he kicks all the other gods' tushies, when he feels like it, etc. He's powerful. And that eventually gets to be what is referred to as the hidden face of God, or even the vacant seat. So what you see with, for example, the Ark of the Covenant, is that's where God is, because God's being basically carried around, right? But God doesn't sit there. There's no icon of God there. Instead, it's against the rules to even try to describe with an icon that God, right? So it's an invisible God. It's a vacant seat. You have nothing sitting there, but this is God's place, right? We carry God around with us. And the cherubim on there, like a recognition that the Air Force is the most powerful force, if you think of it, is they have wings, right? And they're scary. They're not obviously cute little cherubs. They're scary beasts that keep people afraid of going near the ark, right? So the vacant seat. So God, in a sense, has become abstract. And so I think I mentioned, one argument that mathematics leads people to recognize that there's correct answers, and that when we're talking about the most powerful God, then there can only be one. You can't have a multiplicity of them, because one of them has to be stronger than the others, right? So you see the Hebrew God becoming very, very different because of that maybe mathematical influence that came from Egypt, arguably, right? There's different folks that are. Freud, by the way, argued for this, but Jan Asman is another one. I don't know if I mentioned him, but his book, his one book, he's actually got other on Moses. Talks about this. Basically takes Freud's theory and applies it to the concept of Moses. So it's kind of interesting. So you get this gradual change in our interpretation of God. By the way, the quiz question that I've posed for you today is, I think, interesting along the same lines here. So, what characteristics do you think God should have in order to be considered God? So, for Augustine, God is infinite, knows all good, all powerful, all everything. And so he's basically, as Feuerbach will say, he's an exaggerated conception of all the things that we love as humans, being good, being intelligent, being powerful. We imagine God to be the nth power of all of those things, right? That being the case, we have an interesting conflict, because God is all good, God is all powerful, God has created everything, including us. We're his creatures, right? But he's also put us in Scripture in a garden and said, don't eat the fruit of this tree, or you will know the difference between good and evil, and you will suffer death, etc., right? And we did. Whether it's metaphorical, whether we could blame it on Eve, and all that stuff. That's odd to me why in all of the Middle East stories, remember Pandora, all the gifts, that's a woman too. Pandora for some reason is conflated with all the gifts. So that's actually her name somehow. And she opens the box, and so all the evils come out. Well, and all the goods too, right? So the good and the evil come together. And why it's always the woman who's at fault, as far as I know. That's kind of interesting. But so we're sinners. And so the concept of original sin, by the way, officially, through the church, through Augustine, is there because you're human and because Adam and Eve sinned, and that sin stays with us. So we all have it. So even a baby born, fresh out of the, even early because it saw the corn chip.
Mm-hmm.
The Doritos chip. You saw it?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you missed it, huh?
I did, yeah.
guess. Did I not click it?
And there's your beautiful baby.
Any day now.
Really? You're eating Doritos? He's eating Doritos on my ultrasound. Do you see what I have to do?
I know.
Give me that.
Wow.
That's better than the Mountain Dew commercial.
Shoot, I totally forgot now. Why was I bringing that up? Why did I bring that up?
Original sin.
Original sin. Yeah. Oh, so this poor little kid, not even born on, it's early, obviously, right? Because of the corn chip, has original sin, according to Augustine. So that's kind of annoying because, like, a lot of kids die in childbirth, and so officially, that sounds like that poor kid cannot be saved. So that kid goes to, if you're not saved, you go to hell.
You don't go to purgatory? Or is that for something
Or
else?
as my granny actually used to refer to it as purgaturkey,
Purgatory?
which I thought was really, really hilarious because, if you've sinned, you're a turkey, and so you get perked. So purgaturkey is kind of hilarious. And it's actually, she only had one tooth. She would like eat bologna slices by going like, and that was Granny. She always wanted to hug and kiss you, and you're like, oh no, Purgaturkey. No, you don't get to Purgaturkey unless, the church had such a problem with this. Some came up with the concept of limbo. Have you ever heard of that?
I thought limbo and purgatory were kind of the same thing.
No, limbo was not a punishment. What is this? I don't know what that is. Christ in limbo. So, edge or boundary. So it's the edge of hell, but it's an afterlife condition of those who die in original sin. So you've got original sin. You haven't been cured of that by baptism, right? But you're not assigned to hell because you haven't done any sinful things yourself. So there were some theologians that figured out, well, there's got to be a better place for these folks that don't really deserve hell, right? As far as I know, the church recently officially denied that it ever really said that there was such a place as limbo. But that doesn't do away with the problem, because original sin is a sin, and if you're sinful, you can't go to heaven, you can't be saved with that original sin still hovering over you. So it's an issue. But what on earth is it? Why do we have it? My interpretation of Augustine is that all humans grow up with this natural tendency to appreciate some things and hate other things. So we basically grow up with that concept of good and evil that Adam and Eve chose to have. So the original sin basically is the decision to not be part of nature, but separate ourselves from it by having a way of discriminating between good and evil. So it's discriminating between good and evil itself that is the sin. And to be saved, what we have to be able to do is to stop feeling like there is evil in the world. One of my favorite descriptions of this comes from an American philosopher, and it's in his book, The Sources of Religious Insight, I think. So just say otherwise. Sources of Religious Insight. This is, you don't have to buy it. I mean, it's, if you're curious about it, it's online. He's long since dead, etc. Is this the whole book here? Looks like. So, right. So you can read the book if you like. But I'll basically try to. He says it so beautifully. He's in that period. So this is like around 1902 that this was written. So language was really beautiful in English, I think, and the writers, I thought, some of them at least, were really good. But basically what he says is, as humans, we recognize that life sucks. He doesn't put it that way, right? This is my short and sweet, interpretation. But basically we come to realize life sucks. And we need some explanation that will help us. And when we finally, or maybe some never even do, but when we find out a story that explains why life is the way it is, that we totally believe, and we say, that's the way life should be, this is how I should lead my life, and it now explains fully to me why there's the good and bad in life, then at that point, and as I believe it, I am saved. Right? So the salvation comes from no longer feeling like there's pointless evil in the world. Reminds me a little bit of C.S. Lewis when he's talking about what's the one where Joy has died and he's touched by grief. It's not touched by grief, but it's something. Dang. Sorry, I'm getting so old. C.S. No, it's a different one. Something by grief. A grief observed. A grief observed. Really one of my favorites, actually. So, a grief observed. What's this elim? So this is the whole thing, I guess. Looks like. Just keep going. So no one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I am not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning I keep on swallowing. This is right after Joy has died, his wife. So he's at other times it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. He still has Warney there, but Warney lives like 10 years longer than him, his brother. Right. You familiar with C.S. Lewis at all? His life and all that sort of thing? There are moments, etc., on the rebound. And the laziness of grief at my job. Meanwhile, here's the part I wanted to mention. Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms when you are happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing Him, so happy that you are tempted to feel His claims upon you as an interruption. If you remember yourself and turn to Him with gratitude and praise, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with open arms. But go to Him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. There are no lights in the windows. It might be an empty house. Was it ever inhabited? It seemed so once, and that seeming was as strong as this. What can this mean? Why is He so present a commander in our time of prosperity and so very absent a help in our time of trouble? Not that I think I'm in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about Him. The conclusion I dread is not so there's no God after all, but so this is what God's really like. Deceive yourself no longer, right? So that's really sad, that God would be no help, right, in a time of grief. But original sin, we all have it because of Adam and Eve. The sin of Adam and Eve is the whole human race's problem now. And how does Augustine interpret that? It's the problem of good and evil. Salvation, though, is, as Royce describes, once I understand it, once I know why life is the way it is, and then I can see the good in everything and not feel like there's good and evil. Because it's evil that we want to no longer have to put up with, right? But as Jesus shows us, it's all in your mind. According to Augustine, right? I realize that not everybody will believe that's what the whole Christian narrative is essentially based on, but this is Augustine's interpretation, and it becomes dogma, right? That what Jesus is showing us is that you do not have to think of things as good and evil. You can see only good. Even in the absolute worst situation as he was in on the cross. Even God abandoned him, he thought, right? And yet he was still willing to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, right? So if you think, what's this as a model for our behavior, you know, the imitatio Christi, right, is how should we live our life in imitation of Christ? So following his example is also seeing only the good in the world. And if you manage to do that, and salvation is not having any evil in your life anymore, literally this works. And you are saved by following Jesus's model, right? But the hard part is we like good and evil. I mean, we like good, and so we end up with evil. So how do you actually succeed in being saved in this way? It is really hard to totally imitate Jesus and see only good in the world. Granted, absolutely, if you succeed in it, you are saved. But who wants to be saved? You know, it's really hard, especially when you're the rich man. You've got all this wonderful stuff. Who wants to give that up? Who wants to give that up? And it's also another problem, because apart from original sin, you have free will. God gave you free will. And the interesting, we can go back to C.S. Lewis as a wonderful explainer of this too, via Augustine. God gives you free will because that enables you to not be a mere animal in the wilderness, but instead to be a step above animals, because you have free choice. And that's, who would want to give up their free choice, right? And be instead just an animal, right? It's interesting when we do John Stuart Mill, I'll ask you the question, who, you know, Mill says, it's better to be a dissatisfied human being than a satisfied pig. Would you rather be a happy pig or a typical human being that has ups and downs, good days and bad? What would you rather be? A happy pig or a dissatisfied human? And oddly enough, every once in a while I have students say, why, heck, a happy pig? I'd rather be the happy pig. What? You're kidding me. Who would want to be a happy pig instead of a dissatisfied human? What a crazy choice, right?
Maybe if you were like out free and like roaming around and not like being grown.
But you're still a pig. I mean, well, pigs can be pretty smart, but
all you do is stand there and just get fed food, and then you stand there some more, and then you get fed.
yeah, but
That
you
sounds
know,
awesome.
you're even a happy pig sitting there in the little square pen with the sign on you that says you got $5.98 a pound for this pig.
But I can't read because I'm a pig.
Yeah, you can't read it because you're a pig.
So
You
you
know,
just think
and-
you're a happy pig standing there?
And the story that upsets me most regarding pigs is Charlotte's Web.
I'm just thinking of that.
Because the poor pig is sitting there and everyone's all, what a wonderful pig. You screwed up farmers. It isn't the pig that's wonderful. You have a spider that could write. Save the spider. Screw the pig. Find that spider. You know, that's how many spiders in the world do you know that can like web wonderful pig, you know, or that's not it's not the pig. It's the spider. That's neat. So original sin, but regular sin. You have free choice. The reason you have free choice is because God gave you free will, but God knows that right here you're going to sin. He knows it already. It's already happened in God's mind. You don't know it yet because you have free choice. So at that moment, you have a choice to make, and you make exactly the choice that God knows you are going to make. And then what does he do? He blames you for it. Right? So this becomes especially what's known as the problem of predestination. Right? So it's not such a big deal with Augustine, but for those theologians, the Calvinists especially, that are Augustinians and extrapolate on his theology, you end up with a serious problem of predestination. Right? And so basically, everyone from the moment of your conception is predetermined to be saved or not. You haven't even lived your life yet. But God already knows whether you're saved or not, right? So how can you be at fault for that? How can God punish you for living the life that God basically predetermined you to have, right? You get the problem, right? You know, so there's various attempts to react to that. in a way, we might think of, this universe, according to contemporary physicists, all time and space exists at once. So what I'm going to do tomorrow, this evening, this conversation, my birth is basically still there in the continuum of time and space, right? Which we typically draw this way, right? Einstein's cone is light cone, right? So this is the easiest depiction, right? I think I should pull this up before, right? And so all of time and space is there hypothetically in exactly the same respect. So God knows everything, but in the physical universe, according to the theology, so to speak, of physicists today, where's the difference, right? It's all here. So what I am going to do, which directions? So this is time, right? So here I am right now. So what I'm going to do here is already sitting there waiting for me in time and space, right? Do I blame nature for my behavior? It's the same problem, isn't it? Do I blame God for my behavior because he knows what I'm going to do? Do I blame nature for my behavior in our contemporary physicist environment, as they understand it? We don't have that problem, really, do we? Do we blame the universe for the way I am? I'm fat and ugly and old. Do I blame the universe for that? Not really. I feel like I've made my choices, right? Sure, I made the choices I made because I'm in the environment as I was born. My parents have, raised me a certain way. So, sure, all that's the case. But it's still obvious that I've made choices and I'm responsible for being fat and ugly and, all those other things that I've done, right? So, but let's move on. By the way, notice everyone that we have the first exam due when you get it done soon, hopefully, etc. Right? Yes? Everybody's aware of that?
Is that due today? Or not?
Next week?
Oh, I thought it was.
First exam due. Oh, so it does say today, but don't worry. Remember, I want everyone to have an A and have fun and enjoy this class, so don't feel, I didn't do the test. Oh, no. No, I won't. Just send it, though, when you get the chance.
Is it a book?
Open book? You can do it at home. Open conversation. You guys can get together and have a conference on what answers you think. That's good, actually, because the more you talk and discuss it, the more fluent a speaker of philosophy you will be. Right? So I'm perfectly fine with all that. That's cool. Okay, so let's go to Anselm. Now this is 1100. And we have his proslogion in the text. There's also the monologion, but the proslogion is probably the most famous of this, and already mentioned. This is where we get what Kant calls, Anselm doesn't call it this, but Kant later will call it the ontological argument for the existence of God. Ontos means in Greek idea or definition of a thing. So like the study of things on what there is called ontology, right? Ontology, the study of what there is. Willard Van Orman Quine's famous book On What There Is. It's a great book. He died in December 2000, so he's relatively contemporary. Born in Ohio, Harvard mathematician and philosopher. Mathematical logic was his specialty. Okay, so Kant calls it the ontological argument. Kant also described several other arguments. So we have, should I use the modern device or just write real quick? I Ontological is the one. Teleological is another. And cosmological. So ontological, the study of the definition, the meaning of the word God. Bless you. God bless you. Appropriate, consider. Remember Aristotelos, so purpose, so or design, right? So the argument from design. Look how the eyeball, is designed. It couldn't possibly have just evolved. Actually, we know today absolutely it could have evolved, but that's I think Joseph Butler, I think, argued. Some bishop with a B, I don't remember which one, argued. Darwin, contemporary Darwin, argued. The I argument. Couldn't have evolved. So basically, there's a great architect that created the universe. Had to be an intelligent design. That argument, essentially, right? And cosmological is the argument from looking at the cosmos, basically the way cause and effect relationships are, and we'll see this. So we'll look at these with Aquinas next class, actually. But so today we're looking at the ontological argument, and the basic argument is. Should I write it on the board? I'll pull it up. So easy. By the way, this is kind of a play on the Psalms. The Psalms have a quote, "Truly there is a God, though the fool has said in his heart, there is no God." Right? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Who's the fool? Who's the fool? Yeah, and in my interpretation of this, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's Anselm himself, Bishop Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, is actually Italian. Was sent to Canterbury's in England. He was sent there by the Pope, kind of like be in charge of the king, kind of nasty king. It's really quite interesting, his life. He fled a couple times because he and the king just did not get along. Because he's trying to civilize this guy. He's really a brute, so it's kind of interesting, the conflict he had with the king. But meanwhile, of course, he's famous for us because of this particular argument. So I think he's the one that said in his heart, when he had doubts, does God really exist? I don't think you can live an intellectual life and not go through a stage where you doubt that God exists. But, I mean, that's my own bias, because when I started in philosophy, I started off absolutely Roman Catholic. Everyone said God exists. I didn't even doubt it. And I remember getting to philosophy classes and boom, it was smacked upside the head. What? How could this be? Holy shoot. But in college, they said this is all bullshit, right? Remember? That's Steve Mark. Did I show you that one? Right? That's hilarious. But so I think he experienced doubt himself. And so in his mind, he's saying, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I'm the fool that put that into question, right? Well, so how do I answer this? And so we get, anybody see it? God is that than which nothing, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Right? See it? God than which nothing greater can be conceived. Shoot, did I make it too big? A being than which nothing greater can be conceived. So Now, by the way, this definition sticks with us. So when we see Aquinas talking about God, right off, it's God is that than which nothing greater can be thought or conceived. Right? Still today, we've had Yale professors of the religion, philosophy of religion here, and that's the unknowability of God and so on. So by defining God as that than which nothing greater can be thought. So if we think of kind of the progressive definition of God, what is God, right? What characteristics do you think God ought to have? This is where theologians have gone at least as far back as Anselm. And so basically God is conceived of as that greatest number almost. So if I'm thinking like 1, 2, 3, 4, I have trouble after 4. What comes after 4?
6.
6. Is that right?
Might be 5.
5. We have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it should be 5. Warum ist das leichter auf Deutsch? Weiß nicht. So, what's the highest number though?
Infinity?
Is that right?
It's not really a number. I mean, it's a...
So, okay, so here we go. So here's the highest number. Infinity, I guess, is it's like a Mobius strip, right? I think the symbol. What about this?
It's also equal to infinity.
Mathematicians, they just freak me out. They say, what is that? Well, it equals this. What? That's wrong. It's like, the speed of light, what if I'm driving a car and I turn my headlights on and then I step on the gas? Aren't my headlights going, and the light going faster now? No.
It's relativity for you.
Yeah, and you know who taught me that? Marilyn Monroe.
Really?
Yes. I don't know how to spell her name.
Look, could I explain something to you?
Certainly. What?
The theory of relativity.
All of it?
No, just the specific. The general theory is a little bit too complicated going to this length, don't you think? Oh, please. I'll never have another chance to prove it.
But why do you have to prove it? You know what you know.
You don't believe me.
If you say you understand relativity, then I believe you understand relativity.
You're just saying that to avoid seeing me embarrass myself.
No, certainly not.
You honestly believe I understand relativity?
Yes.
Swear to God.
Who's God?
Yours.
You better prove it. With my God, I don't want to take any chances.
No. I'm not theoretic. I demonstrate. Come on. I want to think. Just take it up for a second. Sit down. There are two things you have to know. The first thing is, if I drop a copy of the Brothers of Karamazov in a moving train, it doesn't fall down. force flatten the conductor. It just drops relative to the train. So, if anyone's conducting an experiment in a moving train or in the laboratories in Princeton, the results will always be the same. Because no matter where springs and rolls and balls are, he's there too. That's the first thing you have to know. The second thing you have to know is that light absolutely always travels at the same speed in all directions at once. 186,282 miles per second.
Point 397.
Got faster?
We got more accurate.
Well, don't confuse me. Now then, you have to imagine a man driving in a car at 30 miles an hour and a hitchhiker standing by the road waiting for a lift. Now, the car is traveling at 30 miles an hour, and the man inside the car throws a stone at the hitchhiker at another 30 miles an hour. Now, he's a late pitcher, so the question is, if the car is going 30 miles an hour and the stone is going at another 30 miles an hour thrown in front of it, how many miles an hour is the stone going when it hits the hiker? Answer, 60 miles an hour, right? Pretty straightforward. Well, now let's forget about the stone. But instead, we'll imagine the car is traveling at 30 miles an hour. Then wait a minute, we have to put the hitchhiker back. Imagine the car is driving along at 30 miles an hour, and he's flashing his headlights at the hitchhiker, telling him to get the hell out of the road. Does the light travel at 186,282.397
397.
plus 30 miles an hour? Answer no. Why? Because the speed of light is always the same, right? Did you ever prove that hypothesis?
It's never been disproved.
Yeah, let's hope it never is. You ready? Here we go. Have to imagine.
Is that Scarlett Johansson? No?
I don't know. It's not really Marilyn Monroe, of course.
No.
Teresa Russell,
Oh, okay.
the actress.
Well, it's from 85.
I forget which movie that was from. Insignificance? Was it?
Mm-hmm.
So, and the infinite number is the same darn way. So when I think, well, wait a minute, what about if it's squared? Mathematicians, no, it's this. What if it's you get, looks like snoring after a while, right? In the comics. But you get the idea. It's always going to be the same. Same as the speed of light, etc. So, theology is almost the same issue, but now we call it G, or God, or Bog, or Allah, or whatever, right? So that professor that said all of our gods are the same, that's absolutely right. She shouldn't have been fired, and I'm glad they hired her back. But you get the idea. So G, whatever you symbolize God as, is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So you can't add +1, or 30 miles an hour, right? God is conceived of as the inconceivable, because we can't conceive of this. The same as Augustine, right? Can't conceive of God. God's infinite, by definition, right? But now here's the proof, right? That God must exist, because if you say God doesn't exist, and there are things that exist, so pizzas exist, right? Pizzas exist, right? I have 3 in my freezer. They're DiGiorno. So I'm convinced that pizzas exist. Is there a greatest pizza in Anchorage? Largest pizza. Right this moment.
Probably one that's the largest.
Probably?
Yes.
Well, certainly, depending on how accurately you want to measure.
Certainly. Absolutely. There has to, because there are pizzas, And yes, the problem would be measurement. You know, I'm sure, you know, people would be really furious if I barged into the house. I need to quick measure your pizzas. No, you know, it's not going to happen. But we know, because there are pizzas existing here and now in Anchorage, that one or the other of these pizzas is the largest. It might be just just absolutely smallest little amount, you know. I mean, they're, you know, industrially made, you know, but still, we know, don't we, that one has to be the largest, one has to be the smallest. Has to be the smallest too, right? Okay. And those are pizzas that we know exist. But God, by definition, is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. So if I say God doesn't exist, and I'm saying, well, so pizza is greater than God. And what would that mean? You know, pizza will send out for you, right?
What was that last part?
Pizza will send out for you.
Oh, yes.
That's Spaceballs, right? Pizza the Hut, remember? Sorry, I just had to throw a little humor into the argument, right? You get the idea. Pizza exists, but God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So God must be greater than pizza. So if we say, but God doesn't really exist, then we're saying it's false that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, because pizza is greater than God. But that's false. Because theologians would all, yes.
But that argument is based upon the idea that what you have up there is actually true, that there is such a thing. I mean, maybe there.
Well, you know.
I mean, you're like defining a constant there, right?
He's actually going to argue in here that even if I can conceive in my understanding, so it's one thing for an object to be in the understanding, another to understand that that object exists. So here, this is actually part of what he argues. You know, the painter first conceives of what he will have to perform, etc., etc., etc. So even the fool is convinced that something exists in the understanding. I understand the concept, right? At least in which nothing greater can be conceived. For when he hears of this, he understands it, and whatever. I'm sorry, this is not all. Whatever is understood exists in the understanding, and assuredly that than which nothing greater can be conceived cannot exist in the understanding alone. For suppose it exists in the understanding alone, then it can be conceived to exist in reality which is greater, but since by definition it is that than which nothing can be greater can be conceived, then only the one that actually exists is God. Therefore, if that than which nothing greater can be conceived exists in the understanding alone, the very being than which nothing greater can be conceived is one than which a greater can be conceived. But obviously this is impossible. Hence, there is doubt that there exists a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, and it exists both in the understanding and in reality.
I don't think I understand that.
You know, most people that read this don't feel like they do. God cannot be conceived not to exist. God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. That which can be conceived not to exist is not God. And it assuredly exists so truly that it cannot be conceived not to exist. And I think part of it is we think, aha, so it has to be this X. But that X is not necessarily existing. It could be just an abstract idea that we have, but that idea is not correspondent to an actual existing X, right? But the argument says, but by definition, God really is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So if we're, and the thing is, we don't have to actually imagine it. We can actually imagine it. God is beyond what we can conceive of. So if you're conceiving of God in such a way that it can't possibly exist, that's not God. God has to actually exist. So God has to be different than what you're conceiving of. But by definition, in fact, if what we think of as the universe is the greatest thing, by definition, the universe ends up being God. Like, and the universe exists. And there will be some, like Spinoza, for example, that will argue that is God, right? He's a pantheist, so everything is God. So the universe is basically God. Right? Buddhism seems to be that way, right? Christianity, though, follows the Egyptian, argument in the Timaeus that God has to be outside of the creation, and so greater even than the creation. So God has to be greater than the universe. So God must exist. Is it persuasive? I certainly feel like it's persuasive to me. Kurt Gödel has an interesting
And so just to kind of be clear, and so this isn't saying that anything about, what, that God is necessarily what the Christians believe it is or anything like that, but just saying that it's something.
Exactly. There is the dilemma, and why in my quiz question I'm asking, well, so what characteristics do you think God should have, right? Because actually, the ontological argument proves only that God, as that than which nothing greater can be thought or conceived, must exist. But it doesn't give you any other predicates, characteristics of God. But absolutely, God can't be a white-haired old gent sitting on a throne somewhere out in space. That's just dumb, right? Because for one thing, if he's a guy, his wife is much smarter than him, right? We don't have to think about that, right? So if it's a male, well, the female is way more powerful, right? So that's pretty silly, right?
So it's got a female.
Well, but females do need the males to go get the groceries and stuff,
What?
And they need groceries. And they need stuff. They need jewelry every once in a while, like Saturday. Well, Sunday, really. I'm taking my wife out Saturday, but Sunday is Valentine's Day. You don't show up with roses, you're in trouble. That's how that goes. Right? Valentine's Day. Why we celebrate the martyrdom of a whole bunch of people by giving our wives red roses, I don't know. It's just one of those weird traditions. But yeah, it doesn't define God in any other sense. So, for example, the professor from Yale that was here, Dennis Turner, and his I should quickly show you this. Kurt Gödel was a friend of Einstein. They actually lured Einstein to Princeton because Gödel was already promised to be there too. They both had houses next to one another, and the institute was actually made for the two of them, and there's pictures of the two of them walking every morning from their houses, talking in German to the institute and so on. So Kurt Gödel, obviously autistic genius. His wife was the only one that could feed him, and she died. He ended up starving to death.
Wow.
Einstein tried to feed him for a while too, but it didn't work. So he basically was scared to death that the Nazis were trying to poison him, and so anyone trying to feed him, he wouldn't eat it. Jeez, you can imagine. But he also gives us a version of the ontological argument, which is in just math form, which makes it really very difficult to follow, but it's an even more impressive proof, if you're into math, of the same argument. So he mathematicizes this ontological argument, which is only obviously in words in Anselm. By the way, Kurt Gödel is also considered, apart from being a mathematician, a Platonist. And that seems to have a role to play in this, because one conceptual way of thinking of God this way is in the abstract Platonic sense. So in that sense, God does not necessarily have substance. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist, because they're expanding on what they mean by exist. That way. Same way that triangularity exists. But notice triangularity, which defines all triangles, is not necessarily present in any triangle, right?
What is triangularity?
Triangularity is the explanation for why triangles are triangles.
Oh.
Right? Triangularity, any three-sided figure, right? Is this fun? Where I was. So the ontological argument. By the way, in the text you also have Ganelio's counter, and Ganelio gets into the question of, well, wait a minute, I can conceive of a golden island. Just because I can conceive of it doesn't make it exist. Okay, well, that's actually a problem. He's already sort of dealt with it. But if that comes up in your mind, we could point out that, okay, well, golden islands don't actually exist. We do have the largest island, so I think Greenland is considered the largest island officially, because Antarctica and Australia are continents, right? So Greenland, I think, is the largest island. So we have islands, and we have a largest island. We also have a smallest island, I'm sure. It's probably only there every once in a while, because most of the time it's probably underwater. We can also point out, by the way, that we still have a minute. So x equals that, then with nothing, pick whatever you want, greener, can be thought of or considered. Right? So there are green things, right? So something, therefore, by definition, has to be the greenest thing. I might not be able to figure out what it is. It gets worse. I wrote worse there. I don't know if you can see it from where you are. Did that make the spine, your spine stand up? Ugh. Because that means the devil exists. Right? I mean, you could plug any characteristic in there, and language proves that both the extremes must exist. Does it work for the middle of, that there's the most neutrally green thing? The most average green thing. Most average student exists. Well, I'm still giving a highest degree because it's the most average, so.
Right.
So maybe you still have to use the extremes to recognize. Because, okay, there are students, there has to be an average.
You can certainly find.
So you can find the most average student. He might live in Gary, Indiana. I don't know. Right? I don't know if Gary, Indiana is like the quintessential average American city anymore. It used to be for like 5 minutes. Is this fun? Are you having fun with this? So you can go out. So you can't prove, aha, so see, Jesus is God. That doesn't do that for us. That doesn't give us any supercalifragilisticexpialidocious God at all, really. I don't know what else it means. By the way, the critique that Kant gives of this ontological argument is that the verb to be, so the conclusion is God exists. And Kant argues, yes, but exists is essentially the verb to be. So you're basically saying God is, and then you don't finish the sentence. So that's the problem with it, says Kant. It's an incomplete sentence, because you have to give some kind of predicate that actually then limits the characteristic that God has.
Like where he exists.
Whether he's Caucasian, or is he Vulcan? Is he, square? I don't know. Circle. What is something? The thing is, well, as soon as you do that, you get, obvious critiques like God is the flying spaghetti monster, right? I believe in, I'm a Pastafarian, right? I believe in the flying spaghetti monster. You've never seen the?
No.
Never heard of the Pastafarian?
I don't think so.
I know we're officially done, right? But you haven't seen that? Well, that's funny.
You boiled for your sins.
So you get the idea that
It's pretty much a religion that was made as a mockery of religion.
exactly.
That's why they.
Yeah.
I've always tried to figure out whether the believers actually believe it or whether they're just.
I think they're just making fun of.
That's always been my thought, but I'm sure there are some
Well,
people
this-
out there who truly believe.
This is 2 meatballs, and I don't know. I love the spaghetti at like the Villanova or Piccolino's. I love it when they give you the 2 meatballs, but then I take a picture of it and I try to present it as see the flying spaghetti monster exists. Have a good weekend. Be safe out there. I don't know. It was really getting quite warm, so I don't know if we still have that icy condition.
I just came in from Anchorage, it wasn't terrible.
Yeah, I have to go into Anchorage to get my daughter. So
The
I
roads
will.
are not terrible right now, but if it gets cold again, it's wet, and the roads are wet in between here and there.
Well, I'm leaving right now, so she was finished.
That just rolled in,
What just rolled in?
if you look at the mountains.
Oh, we have a fog. Oh, we do.
Your progress now.
Yeah, there's actually a better one. Actually, I should have just said flying spaghetti monster. None of these are the one that I'm used to seeing. I don't get it. Why am I getting all these? None of these are, this is, well, oh well. There it is. That looks pretty cool.
Huh.
It's to make fun of,
Religion?
yeah. But I mean, religion can make fun of itself too. I mean,
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's a sin to do so, according to some religion.
oh, Lord, yeah. I'm so glad that I live in the country I do, because I wouldn't be able to even study this kind of stuff in some countries. I'd have been killed long ago.
Most Islamic countries.
Oh, at least. There's rules against blasphemy in a lot of places. In fact, at the UN, there was over 50 countries trying to enforce blasphemy laws worldwide, which would impose those laws on us here. Can you imagine that going over? No, I don't think so.
That get passed.
That'd go
It wouldn't go over in
really
France.
well, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't go over very well. I think of the Monty Python. I mean, the life of Brian.
There's
my
nothing
goodness.
but blasphemy.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I had a question for you about the paper.
Yes, term paper,
Yes.
or term project, or whatever you want to call it, yeah.
First, I was just going to say I did get my exam in last night. It was pretty good, though. I hope I was still
Oh.
pretty understandable toward the end. But
Oh.
I think they should be pretty.
As soon as you start getting punch drunk towards the
Well,
end.
it was like 3 in the morning when I finished, but now it's.
Well, if it's confusing, I'll send it back and ask for
It
reinterpretation.
shouldn't be too confusing.
It's philosophy. Part of it's supposed to be.
philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. I mean, did you ever try to make out what Derrida is saying? I'm sure you're. Isn't he the one you're
I
doing?
still haven't finished starting on that guy. I haven't finished starting the.
You
Yeah.
haven't finished
Okay,
starting.
I have not quite started my paper. I've got some concepts down, but yeah.
And what was your topic going to be?
My topic. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually.
Yeah,
Um,
rereading Derrida though, it's just confusing already. But yeah.
I didn't actually. I haven't gotten a topic yet, and kind of need to get one going.
Uh-huh.
So I was actually going to ask you for some advice on which ones.
Well, where do you feel like are you interested in religious subjects, or science, or psychology?
Science is more my thing. I've never been particularly good with theoretical stuff.
So like Steven Pinker is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's a psychologist, right? But he's good. So look him up, Steven Pinker.
Steven Pinker.
Right. I have him on my list.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you could just Google him, Steven
Yeah.
Pinker. In fact, if you're interested in looking at any of his books, I have 2 or 3 or so of his books in my office
Mm-hmm.
that you're welcome to look at if you have a minute.
Yeah, sure.
So we can go
Yeah,
down
I've got hit with 2 term papers at once, and one of them is for my capstone class. So,
Well, you have until the end of the semester, of course.
yeah.
All I'm asking at this point is for you to basically be working on it. So select your topic, say what sort of bibliography you're thinking. In other words, try to.
Find sources. do that
Yeah.
stuff.
Don't wait until the night before it's due.
But I
I've
work
had
best under pressure, they say.
Yes, but you need enough time to
Oh,
work
I know.
on the particular.
Overnight papers are always interesting to reread.
Yes, yes. I've gotten